Before the crash of 1929, before everything changed, there was one name on Wall Street that was basically mythic: Morgan. We're about to dive into a wild story of insane power, a total collapse, and one of the most incredible reinventions in financial history. I mean, just listen to that. That quote tells you everything you need to know about the power of the House of Morgan back then. This wasn't just a bank, it was the institution run by J.P. Jack Morgan Jr. In the Roaring Twenties, their influence was so complete, people on Wall Street literally talked about them like they were gods, shaping an entire era of easy money. Well, it turns out even gods can't defy gravity forever. After pumping up the market by almost 40%, the crash of '29 hit like a freight train. And here's the crazy part. Thinking a fellow rich guy would have their back, Jack Morgan actually helped get Franklin D. Roosevelt elected. Talk about a miscalculation. In a complete 180, FDR turned on the very people who backed him, blaming them for the whole mess and promising a new deal that was going to hold them accountable. So this huge political showdown is what sets the stage for our first act. It's a story of how an act of government revenge, completely by accident, gave birth to a brand new financial giant from the ashes of the old one. And the weapon that split the House of Morgan right down the middle was this: the Glass-Steagall Act. The whole point was to stop the crazy speculation that led to the crash. Basically, it drew a line in the sand. You could either be a normal bank that takes people's deposits, or you could be an investment bank that issues stocks. You couldn't be both. For Jack Morgan, it was an impossible choice. So the investment banking side of the business got the boot. But it didn't just fade away. Jack's own son, Henry Morgan, and one of his best partners, Harold Stanley, grabbed the reins. And what they did next just shows you the incredible power of a brand name. They called their new firm Morgan Stanley. And just that name, the Morgan name, was enough to raise over $200 million, making them the biggest investment bank on the street, like overnight. All right, so for decades, Morgan Stanley was the king, respectable, first class, the top of the food chain. But as we head into the post-war years, a totally new kind of banker started showing up. They were hungrier, way more aggressive, and they were ready to take on the old guard. A sleeping giant was about to get a very rude awakening. At the heart of it all was this massive culture clash. You had Morgan Stanley, which was classic old Wall Street, all about handshakes, long-term relationships, very prim and proper. And then you had Salomon Brothers. This was the new Wall Street. It was all about the deal, the transaction, and yeah, pure unfiltered greed. They looked at Morgan Stanley and saw an old king just waiting to be overthrown. And then this happened. The moment that sent an earthquake through the entire financial industry. IBM was always a Morgan Stanley client. It was a given. But Salomon Brothers marched in with a cheaper, faster offer for a massive $1 billion deal. And IBM said yes. All of a sudden, the firm nobody thought could be touched was bleeding, and every other bank on the street could smell it. That shock from the outside forced Morgan Stanley to evolve, to become more competitive. But it also kicked off a war on the inside. A huge merger brought two totally different worlds and two incredibly ambitious leaders under the same roof. And it was a battle for the very soul of the company. So let's meet our two fighters. In one corner, you've got John Mack, a.k.a. Mack the Knife. I mean, the name says it all, right? He was a Morgan Stanley lifer, known for his gut decisions, his brutal ambition, and his love of taking big risks. In the other corner, Philip Purcell, a total outsider from Dean Witter. He was a former consultant, cautious, methodical, a planner. These two were like oil and water. A collision was pretty much guaranteed. And in a move that shocked everybody, the board picked the outsider, Purcell, to be the new CEO. Mack, who everyone thought was the heir apparent, was made his number two. You can imagine how well that went. The culture clash was instant. Mack fought Purcell's careful style every step of the way and eventually was forced out. After that, Purcell filled the ranks with people who would just agree with him. A ton of top talent left, and Morgan Stanley's performance just went into a nosedive. As dramatic as that internal soap opera was, it was about to look like a schoolyard squabble. Why? Because the entire financial world was about to be shoved right to the edge of a cliff, and Morgan Stanley was standing right on the edge, looking down into the abyss. By 2005, the place was a mess. In a move you almost never see, a group of retired partners, the old guard, staged a public revolt to get Purcell fired. And it worked. So who do they call to come back and save the sinking ship? The man they'd kicked out, John Mock himself. He came back to a hero's welcome, but he was taking over a firm whose stock was down 50% with billions in losses. Mack knew he needed a huge, bold play to turn things around, and he found it in mortgage-backed securities. It's kind of like a financial smoothie. You take thousands of home loans, blend them all together into one giant package, and then you sell off little pieces of it. During the housing boom, it felt like a license to print money, and Mack bet the entire firm's future on it. And for a minute, it seemed to work. Profits went through the roof. But then, the housing market started to crumble. This number right here shows you the disaster. $9.4 billion. That's how much Morgan Stanley had to write down when their massive bet went horribly, horribly wrong. And then came the day that changed Wall Street forever. September 15th, 2008. Their rival, Lehman Brothers, went bankrupt. The entire system just seized up. Panic went global, and everyone's eyes turned to the next domino that was about to fall. These are the words of the CEO himself, John Mack. Inside Morgan Stanley, it wasn't a question of if they were going to collapse. It was a question of when. The stock was in total freefall, lenders were yanking their money, the end felt like it was hours away. So, how did they survive? Well, salvation came from a very unlikely place, the U.S. government. Over one frantic weekend, the Federal Reserve did this bit of legal magic and reclassified Morgan Stanley from an investment bank to a bank holding company. That one little change made them eligible for a massive government bailout. In the end, they were declared too big to fail. You know, a near-death experience changes you. And for Morgan Stanley, the trauma of 2008 forced them to completely reinvent themselves, to pivot away from the high-stakes casino that almost killed them and build a totally new identity. So, a new CEO, James Gorman, takes over from Mock, and he has this really simple but radical idea. He wants to totally shift the firm's focus. He wanted to get them away from the past, that crazy, high-risk trading, and move them toward the future, the much more stable, predictable business of just managing rich people's money. And he pulled it off brilliantly. He went out and acquired the giant wealth management firm Smith Barney, which gave them millions of new clients practically overnight. He focused the entire company on serving the growing number of super rich people and made a conscious choice to avoid the huge risky bets that Morgan loved. And you know what? It worked. The business exploded, leading to record profits year after year. And if you want to understand the sheer scale of that success, just look at this number, $3 trillion. By 2023, the firm that was literally minutes from bankruptcy was now managing over $3 trillion in assets. They had successfully gone from a Wall Street casino to a powerhouse of wealth management. But even after all that, the collapse, the rebirth, the whole crazy journey, we have to remember where this all started. This quote really brings us full circle. It's a reminder that, for all its drama, Morgan Stanley is just one piece of a much larger, much older financial empire. And you can see the legacy of that original split so clearly today. That one law, Glass-Steagall, cleaved one great house in two. One path created Morgan Stanley, the elite wealth management firm. The other path led to J.P. Morgan Chase, America's biggest commercial bank. Two modern giants of finance, forever connected by one single twisted origin story.